Thanks a lot, Dale. Okay, get everything going here. Well, Dale was talking about something that he was looking at here in the podium, and you'll see it coming up here on the screen momentarily, and you'll understand maybe what he was talking about. And I think you'll agree with me that no, it wasn't his own reflection that he was looking at. But we're going to have a lesson that deals with anger this morning. And anger is a huge problem. You can clear, well, I don't know how clear you can see that yet. His projector's still warming up. But that's not Dale. We know that's not Dale, right? And it was kind of funny because, I wanted to get a graphic that expressed this idea of anger. And so I go online, and of course, you see all these horrible pictures of people. And I asked Mindy, I said, that might be a little too intense. Have, people, baring their teeth and showing their fists and everything. And I thought, how about one of these kind of emoji things? And she said, yeah, that's better. But when you see a big giant one like that, it's still a little disconcerting, isn't it? So poor Dale is up here, leading singing the whole time, having that thing look at him. And so I can sympathize with you, Dale. That wasn't my intent. But anger is a huge problem, isn't it, in our society today? And there's so many struggles that we see people having with anger. You often hear reports of road rage, right? Where someone gets so angry while driving their car, they resort to violence, sometimes with deadly consequences. It's awful. A lady was killed in her car. Somebody threw a rock off of an overpass, and I saw that just a couple of days ago. Politically, how about politically? Huge anger issues, right? It doesn't matter where you are in your own personal political beliefs. Both sides seem to be so angry with one another that it just almost creates a political gridlock. And we just spend all our times being angry with one another. You can bring it down to the family, and oftentimes in family relationships, anger is very problematic. Husbands and wives not being able to deal with their anger effectively can have devastating effects in the marriage relationship, even in the family as a whole, on the kids. Kids often blame themselves for the problems that sometimes come up between mom and dad, especially dealing with anger issues. And then that leaves an anger issue that oftentimes the kids have to deal with, when maybe the most pressing thing they ought to be really worried about is, did they get their homework done? Instead of that, they're having to deal with these anger issues that are coming in and through their own family. On and on and on it goes. This is one of the things that I think, if we as Christians can begin to understand, that there's a wonderful resource that we have in the Bible. And that when we understand that, it really helps us reach out, study the scriptures, and make the proper application, because they will help us deal with these anger issues. And if we ourselves understand how God's word helps me deal with anger, wouldn't that put us in a better position to share that with other people? To say, here's one of the reasons why I'm a Christian. Among the many blessings that I gain from being a Christian, one of those great blessings is God teaches me how to effectively understand anger, and then how to effectively deal with that anger. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a Christian, because the blessing of being a Christian isn't just a deferred blessing. Now, that's really the greatest blessing of all, that deferred blessing of eternal life in heaven. And that, of course, I think is the greatest of all blessings. But there are blessings that we enjoy in this life, right now. And the more that we appreciate that, the more that we ourselves understand that, I think we'll just be in a better position to share the good news with those around about us. So God in his wisdom gives us fantastic tools. He gives us great principles that work. Effective ways in understanding anger. That's one of the things we're going to talk about. One of the things that we'll see is that anger is not automatically wrong. And I think there are Christians who think that any form of anger in itself is automatically sinful. And that's not so. That's not what God teaches us. But he is going to say you need to be careful. He is going to say that there's a huge danger area here, that if you're not careful, if you don't understand this, you can get trapped in this cyclone of anger. And so we'll look at some of those principles, some of those tools that God gives us to effectively deal with anger. And so let's just go ahead and jump in and take a look. The first passage that we're going to look at here is one that really just emphasizes the idea that anger is dangerous. And that's the first thing that we really need to appreciate and understand, is that it does have this potential danger. You can look over to Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Now, right there, you'll see the admonition, be angry. So that's telling us that anger, that Paul, as he's writing this letter, he's wanting the reader, he's wanting you and I to understand that anger is not automatically sinful. That's really not the problem. What the problem is what he attaches to that. Be angry and do not sin. That's our problem area, is that we allow our anger to cause us to do things that God says we shouldn't do, to think and say things that God says we shouldn't think and say. And that's the problem with it. As we go further in, we're going to see that we're not God. God gets angry. We'll look at some verses that clearly point that out. But that's the point. We aren't God. We don't have the perfect wisdom. We don't have the perfect knowledge. We don't have this infinite capacity of mercy and kindness and wisdom and understanding and knowledge. And so that's very, very important for us to understand. So the scriptures are going to tell us over and over again, it's a dangerous thing. It's kind of like fire, right? It's like playing with fire. You play with fire and you're very likely to get burnt. And so you can see other passages that really are pointed to this same warning. Ecclesiastes 7:9, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. That's sort of like the same thing Paul is saying back in Ephesians 4:26 when he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. You'll notice the last half of Ecclesiastes 7:9 here warns us, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. That is, it kind of finds a comfortable place to stay. It finds a comfortable home. It makes its home in your heart. And that's bad. When anger starts to persist, when it starts to stay, when it becomes long term, that's very problematic, and is one of the warnings. We are warned that it's a very, very dangerous thing. Jesus makes the point in Matthew, the 5th chapter, at verse 22. He says, but I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. I've read lots of commentaries, and they seem to focus on those two different levels of judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. And so lots of commentators focus on that, thinking that that's the main point, that we need to understand the difference between what they seem to think are increasing levels of judgment. You know, you use the word Raca, which simply means fool, calling somebody a fool. You're in danger of the council, and clearly that's probably referring to like the Sanhedrin. And then the last part, but whoever says you fool, Well, it really means the same thing as Raka, will be in danger of hell fire. Well, okay, that's eternal damnation. That's a bigger deal. So they try to pick apart what they perceive to be a distinction between calling somebody a fool, which is apparently really, really bad, but calling them Raka, which is bad, but not quite as bad as calling them a fool. And then you look up the word Raka, and guess what it means? Fool. Uh-oh, what happens? So I don't think that's Jesus' point at all. I think the point is the first half of the verse. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of judgment. And the two elements that follow are just expressions of the dangerous judgment that you're exposing yourself to. One of which can be in this life, the council, the police, our judicial system. You stop and think about how many people get arrested. The overwhelming majority of murders are classified as crimes of passion. That doesn't mean the kind of passion is not sensual. It means that it's explosive anger. Murder is typically the result of an explosive outburst of anger. And where does that get you? That gets you in front of the council. That gets you arrested. That gets you thrown in jail. That gets you down to the courthouse on was it Walnut? And if it doesn't get you there, if for some reason you don't end up in judgment in front, you get away with the crime, they don't catch you for murder, you're going to die. And then who are you going to go see? And what's he going to do? What's he going to say? You might get away with it. So that's Jesus' point. You're not going to get away with this unjustified anger. You are in a dangerous place, placing yourself in a position of judgment. Be careful. That's what I think Jesus' point is. Okay. Be careful. In this life and in the life to come, you mess with anger, you are likely going to have to pay a heavy price for it. Be careful. It's dangerous. That's what I think Matthew 5:22 is saying. Proverbs 14:29. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Well, again, that's just, you don't want to be exalting folly. And yet, how many times have we caught ourselves after we've cooled down? Oh, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh, I wish I hadn't have done that. That was so foolish of me, getting so angry and so mad. I made a fool out. In fact, I've said that to myself. I made a fool out of myself, because I got so angry. Well, that's what this verse is saying. It's dangerous. Proverbs 29:22. An angry man stirs up strife, and a furious man abounds in transgression. See, that's the problem with anger, is that it promotes just terrible judgment, terrible decision making. And so over and over and over again, the scriptures warn us. Now, what's interesting is to see, therefore, then how, you can see why, in light of that, why then anger is typically discouraged all through Scripture. Turn over to Colossians 3 at verse 8. The Apostle Paul there writes, "But now you yourselves are to put off all these things." And the first thing Paul mentions here is what? Anger. Anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. And so again, it becomes clear that Paul is saying, don't let yourself get caught in that anger trap, because it leads to all kinds of other things. You see, it leads to wrath. And again, the idea of wrath really is, don't you kind of, when you think of anger and then you think of wrath, don't you think of wrath as kind of a ratcheted up, more intense level? And I think that that's kind of probably the idea that Paul has in mind here, is that that's the pathway we're embarking on. When we give into our anger, it just accelerates. It just gets bigger. Malice, blasphemy, filthy language, the words that sometimes come out of our mouth because we're angry. We would never say those things if we weren't angry, you see. So anger is really discouraged. Paul's saying, get rid of that stuff. Get rid of that anger. Again, it's the Apostle Paul in almost a carbon copy of what he said there in Colossians. We can turn over to Ephesians 4:31. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. So clearly, Paul is saying, I really want to put you on a different pathway. I want you to go on a different trajectory. When you're getting angry, stop. Now, notice verse 32, still here in Ephesians 4. This is, we'll talk more about this at the end of the lesson, but this is that idea of replacement. We replace the anger, the negative, the bad with something good. So look at verse 32, Ephesians 4:32. And be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ also forgave you. See, that's our model. When we see ourselves slipping into that dangerous area of anger, we need to stop and start replacing it with the ideas of kindness, tenderheartedness. That is because anger tends to cause a wall of division between me and whoever it is that I might be angry with, whoever it is that you might be angry with. And you see what Paul's talking about? Paul's talking about, I want you to break that wall down. I want you to start seeing that wall doesn't really exist. It exists only in your mind. It exists only because you've allowed yourself to get angry. You've built this wall. And he said, you need to start tearing that wall back down. And you do that by being kind, by being tenderhearted, by forgiving one another, by remembering how Christ forgave you when you were baptized, and the realization that I didn't deserve that. There was that wall. In fact, earlier in Ephesians, he talks about that middle wall of partition that Christ, who is our peace, has broken down. A middle wall of partition that divided Jew from Gentile, made them angry with one another, where they bitterly hated one another. The wall of partition that existed between all of mankind and God because of sin. All of that was broken down by Jesus Christ. And that's what later Paul will move on to in the 4th chapter. He'll talk about that wall once again. He says, you need to break that wall down. And you do that by being kind to one another, tenderhearted, and forgiving one another. As I alluded to earlier, this is not true for God. And so this is kind of important. It's important for us to understand anger, that anger is not automatically wrong. God gets angry, but as I point out here, it's a righteous anger. Look in Psalm 7 verse 11. God is a just God. And it's real interesting how the psalmist goes on to give an example of that justice. How does he point out that God is a just God? How does he make his case that God is a just God? It's very interesting how he does that. And God is angry with the wicked every day. This is something that I've really taken away. On Wednesday nights, we're studying the book of Ezekiel, and that's one of the things I've really taken away from that, is that this is a way that God demonstrates his justice by punishing the wicked. Typically, and you really see this in the book of Ezekiel, is that the wicked, unrighteous, exploit and oppress the disadvantaged. And in particular, in Ezekiel's day, that would be the righteous people. The righteous people in Ezekiel's day were the minority, and they were not treated well by the majority. And that happens all the time. It happens across cultures, and it's not just with people who are spiritually righteous. It's often people who are simply disadvantaged. It's the poor. It might not have anything to do with whether or not the poor is a righteous person or not. The poor guy is just typically in a disadvantaged situation. And who exploits that? Very often the wealthy do, right? The people in power take advantage. Well, this is what God is doing. God gets that. He understands that's not right. That's not fair. And he does something about it. And that's what's going on in Ezekiel, you see. And it's the typical thing that you see where the people who are in positions of power are using their power to exploit and oppress people who aren't in positions of power. Now, that might be because of the fact that they're trying to serve God, as was the case in Ezekiel's situation, but it might not have anything overtly to do with their attempt to be righteous at all, spiritually speaking. It's just the fact that they're in a disadvantaged situation socially, disadvantaged situation economically, and those above them. And God says, you know what? That's not right. And what does he do? He demonstrates his justice. God is a just judge. How does he show that? By getting angry at who? The wicked. The very next one is perhaps easier to see how this works. 2 Kings 17. 2 Kings 17, 17 and 18. This is talking about Jews now. It's going to talk about this horrible practice that they developed. And this is part of the reason why the judgment, both of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, was so harsh, because this is the stuff that was going, this is the stuff Ezekiel had to watch. What's being described, Ezekiel saw this. And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire. What he's talking about is that in the idolatrous worship, they were killing their babies. And there's archaeological evidence that this was a form of ancient birth control. What better way to get rid of an unwanted baby than to make a religion out of getting rid of that unwanted baby? And they caused their sons and daughters to pass through the fire, practiced witchcraft and soothsaying, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord and to provoke him to what? Anger. Therefore, this is a just God. This is a God that will not sit idly by when people are killing their little babies. Therefore, the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he removed them from his sight. He carted them off into Assyrian captivity and ultimately into Babylonian captivity. He removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. So God is a just God. Now, see, here's the thing about that. Here's the thing. I'm not God. How about you? Are you God? Do you have this complete and infinite knowledge? Do you know everything that needs to be known? See, that's the problem. That's where we have to understand. Okay, and so we have passages like James 1, 19 and 20. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the wrath of man, now the wrath of God produces the righteousness of God. But what does the wrath of man not produce? It doesn't produce what it produces in God. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So that's one of the big takeaways that we can learn and that we can share with people. And say one of the greatest lessons I learned is that angry of its in and of itself is not necessarily wrong. What I have to watch out for is that it oftentimes trips me up. And the reason it trips me up, very simple. I'm not God. Okay? I don't know everything. I can't read a person's mind. I don't know what their motive was. I can look at what they do. I can come to judgments. That's valid. Jesus says, how do you know a tree? You know a tree by its fruit. Okay? How do you know a criminal? You know a criminal by his or her fruit. And it's right, we might coin another phrase that a righteous anger. We could talk about judicial anger. A judge in sentencing a criminal is showing forth anger. Now, it might not be emotional anger. The judge is sitting there and not showing emotional anger, but it's judicial anger. The judge is saying, that's not right that you stole that car. And we're going to lock you up. And the reason is because there's so many people, most people don't go around and just steal cars, right? Most people are pretty good and they follow the rules and they understand how society ought to work. But you have other people that they don't get those rules. I don't follow those rules. And so in a sense, the judge is angry. So it's not that it's wrong all the time. It's that we understand I'm not God. Or the other one is, I'm not the judge. It's not my job to lock that person up. I'm not judge, jury, and executioner, so to speak. So the whole point to this is to understand, and I think that can be best summed up just listening to uh, um, what James has to say. Let every man be swift to hear. When you find yourself getting angry, listen, be swift to hear. And then when you find yourself getting angry, be slow to speak. You know, I constantly tell myself now, Gary, just zip it. Just don't say anything. And that's hard to do sometimes because if you're like me, I hear some of the most idiotic things that people say. I heard a guy say something the other day that's really stuck with me. He says, you know, I have learned that I don't have to attend every argument that I get an invitation to. And I thought, that's a good one. I'm going to remember that. I don't have to attend every argument that I get an invitation to. So that God has righteous anger. So again, that's more of understanding the dynamics of anger, that anger isn't automatically wrong. But with us humans, what we really have to remember is I'm not God. I don't have the infinite knowledge and all the information and everything that he has at his disposal. Therefore, because of that, we must show restraint. And we have many verses, some of which that talk about that restraint that we need to show. Proverbs 29:11, a fool vents all his feelings. Blah. You ever seen that kind of person that just blah, it just comes out? But a wise man holds them back. Okay? You don't have to attend every argument that you get invited to. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer. Now, not only do I not attend, but a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. One of the other things that I think has been very helpful to me is that I can listen to somebody who again, in my mind, I'm thinking that's a bunch of nonsense what they're saying. But what I can say back to them is, you might be right. You might be right. Okay. Now, I'm walking away going, I don't think so, but you might be right. I'm not agreeing with them. I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying you might be. And there is that chance. Well, I'm not God, so maybe my understanding is incorrect. You might be right. Or another thing that's helpful for me is to say, that's really food for thought. I'm going to have to give that some thought. I'm going to have to think about that. Thank you. And thank them for it. See, I don't have to attend every argument that I'm invited to. I don't have to do that. And that this passage, a soft answer turns away wrath. What's that in the Bible for? Oh, I'm supposed to ignore that. And anytime anybody says something that I think is wrong, I'm supposed to pound them like a sledgehammer. Well, maybe I can begin to understand that, well, where anger is concerned, maybe I do need to show a little restraint. I think the scriptures are encouraging me to do that. Likewise, you can look in Ecclesiastes 10, verse 4. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, this could be your boss at work. This could be a political leader. Okay, this could be anybody, the policeman that pulls you over. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses. You just understand that maybe the best thing for me is, instead of getting upset with that authority figure, whether it's a school teacher, whether it's a police officer, whether it's the boss at work, whether it's a politician, maybe I need to show a little restraint. Maybe I need to think about a soft answer that I could respond with, that would be the best policy for me to employ in that moment. The last one that we're going to look at here is, don't hang out with angry people or don't hang out in angry places. That's become more of an issue, especially with the burgeoning of social media, the development of our technology. When I was a kid, we had a half hour of national news. It came on at 6:30 at night. How much national news do we have now? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is relentless. And if you're like me now, maybe I think there are people who can watch that and it doesn't faze them. And if you're one of those kind of people, great. But I'm not. I can't watch it. It drives me crazy. And so I want to be informed. I want to, I want to be an informed voter. I think that God has blessed us with this system in which we as individuals can be involved in the process, in the political process. So I want to be an informed voter, but I have to meter myself. Take it in small doses. So you look in Proverbs 22, verse 24, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your own soul. We perhaps spend too much time listening to talk radio, too much time hanging out in social media. And in doing that and allowing that to stir us up and to anger us, the history book, they're full of examples of individuals who were great at doing this. Adolf Hitler, he stirred up an entire nation of people and said, it's those Jews over there. We got to kill them all. The history books tell us that Joseph Stalin makes Hitler look like a choir boy. And Stalin used the same tactic, make them mad, make everybody mad, make them angry, and then point, it's these people that are causing that. And now, as more information is coming out, the same is said about Mao Zedong in China, that he makes Stalin look like a choir boy. You know what they all used? Anger. Stir it up. And they created cultures that were dominated by anger, and they targeted audience, specific elements within their population to be the target of that anger. And that's going on today. I mean, it's not new. This woke ideology, it's not new. It's always been that way. Look what Jesus did. Did Jesus rile some folks up when he was walking on the face of the earth, and what they end up doing to him? So this is not new. You're not dealing with unique circumstances. And that in itself indicates that maybe the sky isn't falling. I don't have to be so panicked. And so, the scriptures just say, well, let's look at the next one. Here's what David learned in Psalm 37. He said, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. It only causes harm. Did you get that? It only causes harm. For evildoers shall be cut off. You know that completely just God who never makes a mistake in his anger? When he's angry, he never says anything that shouldn't be said. He never does anything that shouldn't be done. He is a just God, absolutely just. And David said, you know what? I can depend on him. For evildoers shall be cut off. God is going to take care of what I can't, of what you can't. And David said, trust that. Whatever you do, don't start hanging out with them. Don't get invested in their ideology, because it will chew you up and spit you out. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. they shall inherit the earth. It's the same language. Jesus used that language in the Beatitudes, didn't he? Who's going to inherit the earth? The meek. The meek shall inherit the earth. So the point there to understand is be very careful. Your use of, as technology advances, it just makes the ability to hang out with angry people easier. With social media, 24-hour news, talk radio, all this stuff, be very, very careful around that stuff. Finally, to kind of wrap this all up, let's make a couple of summation statements here at the end. Anger is not automatically wrong. However, you need to recognize your limitation, and your chief limitation is that you aren't God. You don't have this infinite knowledge, this infinite wisdom. You don't possess that. Neither do I. None of us do. And so the Bible warns us, be very, very careful. How do we do that? Well, we show restraint. This is generally speaking what the scriptures, when it talks to us as humans in dealing with this problem of anger, is generally discouraged, and we're generally encouraged to show restraint. You might be right. Thanks. That gives me something to think about. Okay. You might be right. You just show a little restraint is what is being said. And I think perhaps the most important is to remember Philippians 4:8. It's that idea of replacement. It's the replacement principle. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Learn to start filling your mind when you find yourself drifting off into anger. Fill your mind with the positive things. Now, we do live in a dysfunctional world, but here's the point. Simply because we live in a dysfunctional world doesn't mean that God's good gifts still aren't present. When you walk out that door after services, I want you to look to the east. I want you to look to the west, east. And I want you to look at those mountains. God made those mountains. I want you to look up at the sky and think of the beauty that God created. That's still there in the midst of this crazy, dysfunctional world where people say and do the most evil, wicked thing. The beauty is still there. The goodness of God is still there. And that's what Philippians 4:8 is encouraging us to remember, that in spite of all the messed up dysfunction, God is still there. The beauty is still there, and I need to see it. It's still there even when I'm mad. And it's especially important that I remember that when I find myself drifting off into anger. Perhaps you're not yet a member of the Lord's body. I hope that if you're not, you'll seriously consider changing that you'll think seriously about the benefits, one of which is learning how to control your anger. And you can avail yourself of that this morning by coming forward, hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized. The greatest blessing is that hope of eternal salvation that no one can take away from you. If you've already responded to the gospel invitation, but realize that you've sinned somehow, understand no one against your will can take that blessing away from you. You are the only one. And if you see that sin has come back into your life and separated you from God, you are the only one that can repent. And that's offered to you this morning as well, if you'd like to take advantage of it, asking God's forgiveness. And if you'd like, for the prayers of the brethren here on your behalf, that you might be strengthened. If there's a way that we can be of spiritual help to you, come forward, make those wishes known. While together we stand and sing.